Hi there, my name's Tom Russell, and I've had the pleasure of playing rock music on the radio in Scotland for, well over 40 years now. In fact, I think it's about 45 years. And again, I've had the honour of getting to interview many rock bands over the years. And a lot of these old tapes from the 80s and the 90s and more up-to-date tapes I still have in my collection. And been thinking about it for quite some time, thinking to myself, it's a shame when I'm dead and gone, these tapes all end up in the bin somewhere. So I thought it might be a good idea to release them as podcasts so that they're there for people that want to listen to interviews with likes of Ozzy Osbourne, Angus Young, and Eddie Van Halen, and Neil Peart, etc., recorded way back. We'll be including some of the newer interviews as well, but we've come up with a great idea for the name of the podcast, and it's going to be AAA, as in access all areas, the Tom Russell tapes. Nice and simple. But the reason that I finally got my finger out was I needed somebody to help me with it. I couldn't do it myself either, technically or the marketing. It was too complicated. And I'm a lazy sod now. I'm getting to that age. So very luckily, I came across two gentlemen that I'd actually known for a number of years, Andy and Scott from GlasgowApollo.com. We got chatting about it, and here we go. Last week we recorded our first AAA, the Tom Russell tapes, and it was with David Coverdale of Whitesnake. And tonight we're going to be going back to 1983, an interview that I recorded with Neil Peart, the drummer and main songwriter with Rush, and a man who probably knows an awful lot more about Rush than I do, even though I've played them for all these years, is Scott McArthur from GlasgowApollo.com. Hi, Scott.
Hiya, Tom. How you doing? Right, I warn you now, you might need to rail me in on this interview because the professor, as we call him in Rush circles, I absolutely adore this man. And having listened to the interview probably 5 or 6 times, because again, he doesn't do many interviews, Tom. So it's really nice to hear him speaking from the vaults, because it is rare that he recorded interviews. So let's just, as we have done before, could you set the context? Where was this? It was back in '83, wasn't it? It was the Signals tour.
1983, and it was at a place called Ingliston in Edinburgh. I believe you were actually there.
I was, yeah.
On. Ingliston, not a great venue, and Neil actually discusses it very much. He didn't like the venue at all. In fact, he hated it. But he discusses the reason for playing a larger venue. And even though I've been critical of bands for many a long year about playing not very suitable venues instead of the Barrowland or the Apollo or Hammersmith Odeon, etc., and it actually explains it, as you would imagine. I certainly got a lot more of an understanding during the interview of why the big bands have to play there. It's not just for money. It's they really have to play in the bigger venues. So it was recorded at Ingliston. I think it was the second of did they play 2 nights? I think
they did. Yeah.
And they played the show, and then I went backstage, and I was quite. I think I mentioned it last week. I was quite nervous because Neil doesn't, as you say, do many interviews, but he's got a reputation of being a very, very clever, very well educated man. So I was quite nervous that I would get blown away, but he was lovely, as you can hear. He was so cooperative, and he talks about things like the fact that he doesn't like Ingliston. He talks about his drum solos. He talks about signals. He talks about going to see the space shuttle. I thoroughly enjoyed listening back to it after all these years.
Yeah, he's clearly a very thoughtful fella, and there's people don't like him because of that, because he just tells the truth. He just says what he thinks, and it's quite refreshing. I mean, we had a bit of that with David Coverdale last week as well, didn't we? But the attitude towards Ingliston, I mean, he didn't just not like it. As you said, he hated it. And I mean, as a fan who was there, and I was one of the people that got pulled out the front. I mean, I ended up in an oxygen tent looking up Geddy's nose. It was quite a scary. I remember it because I wasn't near the front, but it became one of those, as he called it, a mob And it was turning round gradually, Tom, and I ended up right at the front at the barrier, and then the crowd surged towards me, and I got squashed and I fainted. And I've never done that since. I've never done it before. I've never done it since. And I remember some guy behind me shouting something, and I can't repeat it on the radio, but I think it was the guy behind me lifted me, and then the bouncers saw me and they lifted me over and got me into the auction tent. But I don't remember that. But then I do remember waking up and thinking, what on earth am I doing here? And literally Geddy was right there, right in front of me. So it was,
And Neil says in the interview very clearly how horrible it is to be up there on a stage and seeing youngsters, and it says how frightening it is to see people unconscious and people fainting. And he was obviously very concerned.
Indignity.
That's the word he uses, Andy. Indignity.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, I don't know.
Which I thought was beautifully put. I thought that was really nice the way he said that. You don't want to see people when they're in that state. No one does. Yeah. No one does. Yeah.
I mean, the way I remember it clearly, I mean, Scott's trousers had actually come down. They were round about his ankles.
Hey, yeah. But that's weekly. That's a weekly thing, Tom. That's nothing special. I do it all the time. There's nothing special in that.
No. Yeah. But again, just again as a Rush fan and a Neil Peart, particularly a Neil Peart fan, he also has a reputation for being quite. He doesn't. He's written about it. You know, he doesn't want to be close to the fans because he feels nervous about it. But then when you hear that interview, he clearly loves the fans. It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because his public persona is quite cold. But any Rush fan will tell you, no, he's not like that. It's just he feels uncomfortable and he thinks it's ridiculous that people put him on a pedestal. He always did. And he said the same about Buddy Rich. You know, he said, you know, the great musicians, but all I do is play the drums, you know, and I love that sort of distance that he creates between the fans. I mean, it doesn't always work, but I think for him it did work. And I certainly I've read all his books more than once, and they're all very introspective, but very thoughtful about the fans and the music and the environment and other groups. And I don't think I've ever heard them be so negative about something ever in a book, like he was about Ingliston. And I personally, we called it the Coo Shed, Tom. Do you remember that, Andy? We called it the Coo Shed because it was a coo shed. I mean, it was not a venue, and it was not meant. Sorry, a cow shed. Better say that because people might not be from Scotland.
Perhaps we should have a listen to the interview, and then we can have a wee chat about it after the interview.
And welcome back to The Rock Show with me, Tom Russell. Well, last Tuesday night, I travelled through to Ingliston to see the first of 2 concerts by Canadian band Rush. After the gig, I went backstage and I spoke to drummer Neil Peart. I asked him firstly if he had enjoyed the show.
Yeah, within reason, yeah, it was okay. I mean, this is not a hall that we particularly enjoy playing, but I was saying to you before the interview that we came here specifically for Scottish fans and no other reason.
What are the problems? Are they mainly technical?
Well, technical is a big term. I mean, that encompasses a lot of organic things too about how you feel when you're on stage. You know, it doesn't sound good, it doesn't feel good, it doesn't look good. It's a very uncomfortable, cold, damp place to be in. So it just, it's not enjoyable at all. We played this time the NEC for the first time, which was a real pleasure. I mean, it's a nice modern big hall in which it's possible to sound good regardless of the sound. You know, there's a big fallacy about big halls and small halls, especially in Britain, because until recently there's never been a good sounding big hall. So everybody always thought, oh well, it's a waste of money to go see a band in a big hall. But in America there's so many big halls that are actually better sounding than the small halls because they were built at a time, say in the 60s for instance. A lot of the halls in America were built when there was money to spare to make a place look good and sound good and have comfortable seats and have, you know, warm heating and comfortable dressing rooms and so on. And here, of course, it was always your Bingley Hall or Ingliston Hall. And technology has caught up so much where, like a Wembley, for instance, is a really good place to have a concert now because technology has progressed to the point where it's possible to make a hall like that really sound good. But technology can never conquer the difficulties of Ingliston or of Bingley Hall. But again, the NEC is a hall that is perfectly suited for a modern, big-scale rock and roll show. So we were very satisfied playing there.
I noticed some black curtains right around the top of the hall tonight.
Yeah.
Is that something that you brought along yourself?
Yeah, well, it's something we asked them to do because it had been so diabolical last time we were here that it was the only thing we could think of that might help a bit, you know.
And does that deaden the sound?
Well, hopefully to some extent, you know. It's difficult when you have the ceiling is so low and it's all hard surfaces and so on. So it's a stopgap measure really, and it doesn't have any miraculous effect, but it was literally the only thing that we could do, so we did it.
You were telling me earlier, Neil, that you've all got the cold.
Yes, everyone's come down sick. Worse for Getty because, of course, he's got a chest cold, and for a singer, that's the worst thing. Whereas for me, I can just, it only makes me suffer. It doesn't make the performance suffer. So it makes it even more difficult. You know, it brings your spirits down that much more to know if any of you are sick, let alone all of us being sick.
And do you vary your drum solo night after night, tour after tour, or is it a set piece that you do?
It changes definitely from tour to tour, although I see it in my head much like a song where it has particular arrangements and pivot points, and one pattern will lead into another pattern, and there are parts, the last third of the solo would never be the same ever, you know, it would never repeat itself because there's nothing in my head that's fixed. There's certain things that'll be in there, but never in any particular order, and the consecutive patterns of things are always totally random, you know, they're whatever I happen to think of next. So the introduction of the solo and the basic framework of the solo has a fixed shape of it, again, like a story or like a song has, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. But there's a section of it that is just left wide open, and if I happen to feel particularly exuberant on a particular night, I can make use of that freedom, and if I don't, then I know that at least I can produce, you know, a good quality drum solo at least.
How well has the British part of this world tour been going, Neil?
Well, it's very successful. I mean, it's a very small part of the whole picture, which from a British point of view might seem insulting, but it's the reality of it. We spent 6 months between Canada and the United States, and then just basically 3 weeks between Europe and Britain. So it's been very good. You know, all the shows have been doing very well, and I was saying earlier how much we enjoyed NEC. It was the first time we played there, and we were very pleased with it as a venue.
I read an interesting quote of the band from a few years ago saying that you preferred a seated arena. Again, because of the fans, you hated the idea of anyone getting hurt.
Yeah.
Well, tonight, I don't know if you could see from your position, but I could certainly see one or two people being pulled out under a bit of pressure.
Yeah, a lot of people being pulled out tonight, and it's one of the things that makes us really despise a building like this. It's a difficult thing because it wasn't because the building was too full, and sometimes we quarrel because it is just greed, and we've had that over here before where they just try to fill a building up too full. In that case, it wasn't that tonight. You know, this building could have held twice as many people, but the people were just that mob mentality kind of thing that made half the building in the first 20 feet of the audience, and a lot of people were being hurt and fainting and having to be pulled out of the audience. It's a terrible thing to watch. It really destroys the fun of being on stage. You know, if you're watching people in such an inhuman attitude, really, they're coming out of there unconscious and being dragged up by their feet and all that, and it's such an indignity that I take it as an affront too. I hate to watch that.
Moving on, the Signals album has been out for a number of months now. Of course, this tour is still the Signals tour, even though it's been out in this country for a good time. Now, how pleased are you with Signals? How highly do you rate Signals as compared with your other albums?
Well, it's natural for anyone who makes sincere music. I think that you always like what you've done recently the best. Everything we've done, we look back on and we see the flaws and we see the good things about it, and hopefully learn from that. You know, so there's lessons to be learned on both sides for us from Signals that we don't really know what they are yet. But when we sit down to start writing the next album and start putting it together, the things that we learned in all of those experiments on Signals will certainly pay off for us.
Mm-hmm. The lyrics, of course, you write the vast majority of lyrics in the band. How do you actually conjure them up? Because they're so complex. How do you actually go about writing a song?
I just think of something that I care about enough to go to all that trouble. You know, I don't know, I don't feel a particular avocation for doing it. It's just a job that I kind of got thrust into, but since I started doing it and enjoyed doing it, I kind of felt like if I was going to do it at all, I would have to make it good. So I just keep little notes all the time of things that interest me, or possible titles or possible ideas and that. But when it comes down to actually doing it, it has to be something that inspires me enough to be bothered, you know, to go through all the trouble of refining all of the words and going through it line by line and just rewriting and rewriting and rewriting so many times to clarify exactly what I'm trying to say and try to say it as clearly and as economically as I can.
The track Countdown, which is of course based on the Columbia Space Shuttle. Now you actually went along as a band to watch the Columbia taking off. How did that come about?
Basically, about 3 or 4 years ago, we went there to take a tour because we'd written some songs that dealt with outer space and so on. Somehow it came to the attention of people there, and we made contact with each other, and we did a tour of Cape Kennedy there. And strangely enough, although it was just done as kind of an interesting thing, we ended up making friends with some of the people there, some of the directors and so on of NASA. And we got to know their families, and after we'd done the tour, we sat at this astronauts beach house right on the sea at Cape Kennedy, and sort of sat there and had a few drinks and talked about this and that, and ended up continuing the relationship. And anytime we played in Florida, they would come to see us, and we'd be in contact with them from time to time. So we always had a standing invitation that whenever the first launch took place, we would be invited. And as it happened, when it did occur, we were in the middle of touring Texas at the time, which is almost at the other side of the country. So we ended up going there twice because the first attempt had to be scrubbed because there were computer interface malfunctions on the first day. So we were there, we had to fly back to Texas, play that night, play the next night, and then fly back to Florida, see the launch, and then fly back to Texas again and play again that night. So it was a tremendous ordeal that we went through to see it, but of course it was an experience that was well worthwhile.
An experience that you'll never forget?
Oh, unparalleled experience, you know, and there's nothing that people can imagine. I mean, it's easy to be cynical about a thing like that, and to be cynical about America, and to be cynical about the space program. But when you really are there watching this thing, and especially the sound even, the sound was beyond recapturing, beyond description, you know. It's an incredibly powerful sound, and my ultimate sensation at the moment of it exploding and starting to rise in the air was this amount of power can't possibly be under control. You know, it just seemed so immensely powerful that there was no way that men could be controlling it. But of course they were. It went up and it landed. So.
That was Countdown from the LP Signals, the band Rush, and my guest tonight, Neil Peart. The map at the back of the Signals sleeve. I'm sure you've been asked this once or twice. What does it mean?
It's very simple, really. It just requires a little bit of levity. You know, I think people tend to, especially in this country, they take a thing like that too seriously. Of course, all it is the travels of the dog between fire hydrants. And if you can put your tongue in your cheek and look at it, and then you see it and realize that it's just, a clever little thing. But of course, everyone wants to see some cosmic revelation in it, and that's been a bugbear that we've lived with for several years now, that regardless of what we do, if we do it in a frivolous sense or a serious sense, people always find some mystical meaning in it. It's not a thing that we are at liberty to control. It was a joke.
Neil, your hair is a lot shorter than it used to be.
Basically, I don't know, in some ways it's a very personal question, but it's, I just don't like looking the same all the time, you know. I don't like playing the same, I don't like thinking the same, I don't like being the same, I don't like being stuck in a rut. And musically it's a real danger that people like one kind of music all of their lives, and you see that with people that grew up, like my parents growing up during the Elvis Presley age or the Frank Sinatra age or whatever, and all their lives they never liked anything but Elvis Presley's music or Frank Sinatra's music. And the same danger exists now, that people that grew up in the Beatles time, and that's true actually, there are people that are 10 years older than me that can't listen to anything newer than the Beatles. And let's face it, things change, and so they should change, and they change rapidly also. And I think it's partly a response to the world around you, and it's partly an inward response where I will change things sometimes just for the sake of change, you know, even when I'm comfortable a certain way, I'll force myself to get out of that just so that I don't get complacent or just so that I don't get predictable or boring in any sense to myself. You know, I don't like to look at the same person in the mirror all the time or feel like the same person all the time. So a lot of times I'll just make changes in my appearance just to make me feel a bit different, just to let me see the world from a different perspective, I guess.
The guitar in Signals isn't as prominent as perhaps some of the earlier albums. The electronic instruments seem to be becoming a wee bit more to the fore. Was this intentional, and do you think it will continue with the next Rush album, or was it just what you felt like doing with Signals?
Well, it was all of those, really. In some ways, it's something that Signals has been judged by somehow wrongly. It's very superficial to say that there isn't as much guitar, because in fact all Alex is doing is taking on a different role, and it's the same for myself, and it's been very healthy for us because Alex and I have worked together as a rhythm section now. You know, when Geddy's playing keyboards and there is no bass, then it puts Alex into the role of being part of the rhythm section with me, which isn't at all forsaking any being a guitar hero or anything, because I don't think that ever meant very much to us. Is having all that's missing is power chords and a lot of guitar solos, but on the other hand, Alex has the opportunity to work as a bass player would work, in conjunction with the rhythm and in conjunction with me. So it's been very healthy for him and I and our relationship, both musically and personally, to be responsive to each other as musicians. And it's been very satisfying for him too, to have a chance to play in a different way and to explore different ways of playing guitar, and more important, different ways of being a member of this band. You know, it's not the lead guitarist and then the bass player and the drummer, you know. Now it can be keyboards and then the guitar player and drummer work together. It's not something that's necessarily permanent at all, but it was a really honest and healthy direction to take. You know, we're not interested in constantly rehashing ourselves and in the way that so many of the latter-day heavy metal bands are, just making every album indistinguishable from every other album and saying that you're trying to make somebody happy because of it, because that's obviously a very false and very calculated way to be. And we've always tried to make our music spontaneous and intuitive and a sincere reflection of where we are at the time. So Geddy's predominant instrument, he's still playing bass. It's still what he gets the most joy out of and still what he's the best at. But he became interested in keyboards, and it became a vehicle for us to sound different, and more important again, a way for us to approach songwriting in a different way, you know, because we've written, you know, we've got 10 albums worth of songs right at this point, so it becomes more and more difficult to do things differently. So when you have any sort of avenue like that of using the keyboards as a writing tool and using them as a textural way of making the songs sound different and be constructed differently, it's a way that we had to take, you know. It's hard. Again, we don't plan the future. We don't know what the next album's going to sound like, and we don't want to know. It's something that will happen naturally, and it'll happen on the day that we start writing it. We'll start to know really what's inside ourselves. You know, it wasn't a conscious attempt to downplay the guitar by any means, and in fact, in a deeper sense, the guitar isn't downplayed at all. As I said, Alex works just as hard as he ever did. He just transfers that energy in a different way, and he relates to the music in a different way, which...
It's just perhaps a bit more laid back.
Well, you know, that's superficial too, because it's not. It's just a different approach. Sometimes he's playing like a bass player because there isn't a bass player there. So he and I are the rhythm section, and I can't find fault with that personally. You know, it's easy to say that, well, there's not enough power chords and there's not enough guitar solos, but the guitar solos there are, Alex is that much more happy with. You know, and a short guitar solo like the one in Chemistry, for instance, I happen to know that Alex really loves a lot, or the one in Analog Kid too, is a short guitar solo at the end of the song, and it's put in a different way, a different place in the song than we might have put it in the past, and it's set up in a different way dynamically than we might have done in the past, but it's still a wonderful guitar solo. You know, it's just people tend to overlook the subtleties because they're looking for the obvious. They're looking to be banged on the head, and that's never been the way we've approached things. We like the power and the energy of hard rock, but we don't like the mindless sort of slogging of it. You know, it's never been a way that we wanted to sound or wanted to work.
The second night at Ingliston is, of course, the last night of the tour.
Right.
What's next for Rush after that?
Okay, after that we'll be taking a holiday, and then the 1st of August we'll start writing. We take a month up in the northern part of Ontario where we live in Canada, and we just hire a place where we can go away for a month by ourselves and just work. And we'll start working on new material at that time, and then around the middle of September we go into the studio again and start working. So we should have a new album in your shops by probably February or so, I would guess. Hopefully it'll be finished before Christmas. So.
Working title?
None. We haven't even started to. We've talked about what we like about Signals and what we don't like, and what we'd like to change and what we'd like to do differently, and so on. But our communication is an internal sense, where it's not in a way that anyone else could understand or should understand, really. We know what we're doing and why. So I know that when the first day of writing comes on the 1st of August, that we're all going to be in a very enthusiastic and excited attitude.
You must all be looking forward to the break, though, after such a long tour. You must be needing a holiday.
Absolutely. I mean, we do still, even though we've slowed down our pacing to some extent, we still do tour a lot more than we need to, and possibly, in a personal sense, a lot more than we should. But at the same time, there's a value in that we recognize and hesitate to mess around with it. And the fact that playing night after night improves you as a musician so much, and traveling all the time keeps you on the knife edge of reality too, where you're not going back to your country estate and living a cloistered, sort of dissatisfied environment. When you're always out there, you're always thinking, and you're always being exposed to people, whether you want to be or not. There's always things to look at and things to think about, and playing night after night forces you to keep improving, again, to keep interested in it. You keep introducing new little ideas, and our sound checks during the afternoon are a very important part of our day too, because we usually spend the first half hour of our sound check just jamming, basically. Somebody will start an idea and the rest of us will join in, and a lot of very interesting things have come out of that source. And the last 2 tours we've started actually recording them, because there's so much that was getting wasted and lost. Some things would be good enough that you'd remember them anyway. The middle part of Tom Sawyer is an oft-quoted example, and that came right out of something that Geddy just used to use to test out one of his synthesizers. And it stuck in our minds, and when it came to the song, we were looking for an instrumental part. That part came to mind. But we found that on the last tour, when we were looking for a particular part for a song, or if we were just looking for interesting ideas, Geddy and Alex would be sifting through all of those soundcheck jams and coming across really magical little things that, because we were all busy doing it, we couldn't sit back and listen and go, yeah, that's an amazing congruence of things, A lot of times when you're just experimenting with your own playing and you're responding to what somebody else is doing, you don't hear the wholeness of it. And you go back later and listen to the tape of it and you go, yeah, you'll hear the magic that was there at that moment, and then find a way to make it work as a part of a song, or as a part of an arrangement of a song. Yeah, I just wanted to take the opportunity. We were discussing venues a little bit earlier, and a lot of things that a lot of people don't understand is that at our particular level, a band doesn't really have a choice about the venue they play because of the number of people that want to see us. And we could say that, okay, we're not going to compromise, we're going to keep playing a small hall. But when you can say, well, instead of 2 nights at Ingliston, we'll do 2 nights at the Glasgow Apollo, which means that only half as many people will get to see us, and likely a lot of the most ardent fans just won't be able to get a ticket for it. So whom are we cheating by that? It's a thing that we've run into, especially over here. And I was saying earlier that in America we were forced into the big halls. It wasn't a choice that we made. We went into all around the United States. We used to stay in the small theaters, and we'd do 2 nights and then 3 nights and then 4 nights, and it was getting out of hand because we just haven't got the time. Somebody, again, is going to lose. If we spend 4 nights in each of those cities, say on the east coast of America, then we won't have time to get to the west coast of America, and that whole bunch of our fans is going to suffer. And the same situation over here. We got to the point where we were doing 5 nights at the Hammersmith Odeon, and 3 nights at Glasgow Apollo, and 3 nights in Newcastle, Birmingham, Manchester, all these cities. And it just became, it's too much for us as human beings to be stuck in those hotels in those towns for night after day after night after day. And it became very hard for us to take. And we recognized the fact that even with trying to do as many nights as we could stand to do, a lot of people that really wanted to see us, and people that had been coming to see us for years, suddenly were unable to because the demand was so high. And it is quite literally a matter of supply and demand. So we looked for alternatives over here. I mean, we wanted to find ways so that we wouldn't have to be here for 3 months, but at the same time so that everyone who wanted to see us could. So when it got to be that there was tens of thousands of people wanting to see us in Britain, we were forced to start making choices, and then it becomes it's a limitation that's forced on us. It's not a compromise that we make, because we don't choose how many people want to see us. We make the music we make, and we play the way we play, as we have always done. And if more people like us, of course, that's wonderful, but it's not something that we set out to achieve or would have chosen, to be truthful. Beyond a certain level, success becomes much more of a nuisance than it is a pleasure. So it was a thing that happened where we had to go to Wembley, and now we're doing 4 nights at Wembley instead of 4 or 5 nights at Hammersmith Odeon in London, for instance. In the same situation up here, obviously Ingliston is not the kind of hall that we would choose to play in, and it's not the kind of hall that we would like our fans to see us in either, because we know we can't portray the kind of show that we would like them to see. But unfortunately, up here, there isn't a choice. I mean, someone really ought to start a campaign to build an NEC in Scotland, and then I think it would correct all of the problems and the defection of bands away from the Glasgow Apollo and towards places in Edinburgh and that. And we recognize the problems that exist over here with transportation, which is more so in the United States, of course, because there are always ways where somebody that they know has a car. Not everybody in the United States has a car, as much as the fallacy over here would hold that to be true. But usually everybody knows somebody who has a car or a van, and they can all pile in and they can get there. But over here, of course, with the trains, everything closes too early. It's basically what it is, from the pubs to television to the buses to everything closes too early. And it's a tremendous disadvantage, and it's something that we're very cognizant of, but at the same time, we're powerless to change. I mean, we can't build a new building somewhere nearer to Glasgow, I'm sure if we could make that happen, we would.
I think there was actually quite a few of the Glasgow chorus through tonight, the ones that were singing and closer to the heart.
Yeah, I was going to mention that that's still a really lovely thing that did, I think, happen for the first time up here, and one of the reasons why we used that particular version of Closer to the Heart was because of the Glasgow chorus, because the first time we heard that, it was really a lovely thing, just a great spontaneous thing, and a lot of people, the cynical side of the music press and all that, look at that as being manipulating the audience or whatever, but obviously it wasn't. I mean, nobody stood on stage and said, come on, sing along, and that's the beautiful part of it, that people just did sing along, and no one had to, the same with, we don't stand up there and say, okay, everybody clap your hands. And the fact that when people do clap their hands, it makes it that much more special, because it does happen spontaneously. And a lot of bands nowadays, I was saying about the calculated, mercenary nature of a lot of those bands, and the audience participation is done the same way. They watch what happens spontaneously in a situation like that, and they try to force it to happen, and they try to force the audience to get involved in the performance. And we love it when the audience gets involved in the performance, but we're not going to ask them to, or force them to, or urge them to. It has to be genuine, just as our music has to be genuine. We want the audience's response to be just as honest as our performance is, basically. So we're not going to mess with that relationship at all.
Well, Neil, it's been great talking to you.
Thank you. I'm speaking with you.
In February, we'll see the next Rush album.
Early in the new year, I would think, I'll have a new album ready.
Neil Peart, cheers.
Thanks, Tom.
So that was Neil Peart recording in 1983 backstage at Ingliston, Tom. Do you remember much else about the gig?
About the actual gig? Not really. Standing watching the gig, my head was all over the place. I remember, as I said earlier on, I was worried about doing the interview. I wasn't particularly experienced at that time in '83. I'd only been I'd been doing interviews for about 3 years at that time. But Neil Peart was a big one to get.
Oh, yeah.
So I was quite nervous, and I enjoyed the show. But we went back to some of the things that he was talking about. I remember him talking about the Glasgow Apollo Choir, because I touched on the fact that one of the double live albums, half of it, or one side was recorded in Glasgow. Aye. And he talks about the Glasgow Choir, and that was nice.
That was nice. Yeah, I think the when they did Closer to the Heart in particular.
Mm-hmm.
It was amazing. It's so evocative for anybody who's a Rush fan and anyone who's from Glasgow. You know, it was one of those moments, those special moments, a bit like, you know, Whole Lot of Rosie when they did the Angus shout, you know, the same sort of thing. It was incredibly powerful. That Exit Stage Left is a brilliant album. And actually, they reissued Moving Pictures recently, and they included a copy of the gig, not from the Apollo, but from Hammersmith. And it's actually a better recording than Exit Stage Left. But the only thing that's missing is the Apollo choir. It's nothing like it at Hammersmith. I mean, there's nothing like the frenzied sort of, as David Coverdale called it, you know, the mob, you know, sort of. It was an extraordinary recording, and I absolutely love it. I listened to it, and Jacob's Ladder's the other one that's on there, and it's magic. It's really good. It's only one side, so there are only 2 or 3 songs. Typical Rush.
It's beautiful the way he talks about it and says the fact that it came naturally. It wasn't a case of Geddy or Alex or anyone conducting them and encouraging them to sing along. And he's quite disparaging about bands who do that. And it can be a bit false.
Yes. And ironically, their first big tour was with a band that do that all the time, and that is Kiss.
Yes.
So that was quite funny, I thought, when I heard them saying that. Although they're very friendly with Kiss, but that's what Kiss are very good at, getting the crowd going, aren't they? But they do conduct it like a maestro. You know, they're up there at the front getting everybody going. Rush didn't need to do that.
Do you think the listeners will enjoy the bit when he talks about structuring his drum solos?
Yeah. I get goosebumps listening to that because it's the sort of moment at the gig. If you've never been to a Rush gig, I mean, any gig, usually when the drum solo comes on, with a few exceptions, that's when you go to the loo, because I just can't be doing with them. I don't enjoy them at all, drum solos. But my God, his drum solos, certainly from the 80s, have been a spectacle, and right through to the R30 tour at the end in the UK anyway. His drum solos are just legendary, and it's nice to hear that he, not a surprise though, that he doesn't do it the same every night. I would never have thought he would, because it is the moment where he does do some of his famous riffing off his own mind. You know, he during a track, they were always very precise. No matter how complex the tune, they were always very precise. But during the solos, they just let it go, and it's nice to hear that is actually what he did, which is really lovely.
A question for Andy. When you were listening, Andy, to the interview there, you being more into the sort of the production side, the technical side, and the artistry. What did you think when he was talking about the back of the Signal sleeve?
I haven't actually looked at the back of the Signal sleeves because I don't have any Rush albums ever. I've never had a Rush album.
What?
Maybe that question should be for Scotland. I think we'll maybe do that again.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, obviously I've got the Rush album, and I've got Signals. I've got 3 different versions of it. And on the back sleeve, there's like a dog, and then there's like a number of fire hydrants with a dotted line going between each fire hydrant, right?
Yeah.
And he clearly, and it is really funny because as a Rush fan, I'm guilty of what he said. You know, we're always looking for hidden messages or for something cosmic and everything that Rush do. And they did do that in a lot of their earlier albums, right up to Moving Pictures. But after Moving Pictures, and the album Signals was the album after Moving Pictures, they stopped that right up to the very last album, which they went back to it. But in the sort of 15 albums that followed Moving Pictures, they didn't do the mystical stuff. So it was really funny. You were basically taking the piss, which I thought was really good. I thought it was really funny.
Yeah.
Were you aware of that before, Scott, or did that interview was just listened to? Did that was that a revelation?
It was a revelation. Not a surprise, but it was a revelation. I've not really heard him saying that before. He hints at it in one of the books, but even in some of the Rush podcasts, which are people who do only talk about Rush, and I've got 2,000 episodes. You know that I've never heard that mentioned before, so I think it is quite a revelation for listeners.
Another bit that I found probably one of the highlights of the interview as a listener was when I asked him about or when he told us about going to Cape Canaveral, or Cape Kennedy as it was at the time, to watch the launch of the space shuttle, and that whole part of it. He talked quite a bit about that part, about the countdown song, and traveling back and forward to Texas for the gigs, and just the sense standing watching this thing get up into space. It was incredible the way he described it.
Magic. I mean, that was a song that they started the Signals tour with, and the first song, and they had amazing visuals because they were given unique recordings of the Shuttle Challenger actually taking off as well. And it's one of these pieces of music that it completely resonates with the moment. It's a brilliant example of storytelling, and progressive music is probably the best at doing that. You know, it gets into the story of things, and it doesn't always have to be about Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. You know, they can talk about contemporary things. And that song, it's headphone music. You've got to put your headphones on and listen to it, because there's so much going on in the background. It's brilliantly produced, and they've got the live talking, you know, between the shuttle and the Cape, and they've got the noise, the rumble of the engines. It's phenomenal. It's an absolutely brilliant track, and I'm not surprised that the guys, the NASA guys, like Rush, because it's so typically scientific and complex that you'd expect them to enjoy it. So no, I thought it was a real highlight for me as well, Tom. It's great to hear him talking about it.
Where this is earlier on in the interview, I don't know if you covered that, where you mentioned you've had your hair cut, or your hair shorter, and then he kind of says, I like to change all the time. I like to do. I'm not this. I don't want to be the same person. I don't want to think the same person. I don't want to look the same. And then he just segued beautifully into, like, started talking about Signals. I thought that was beautiful. I thought that's a seasoned interviewee.
He very rarely talks about personal things. I mean, I don't remember.
Yeah.
You know,
it says right at the start. As soon as I asked that question, and he starts the answer, I thought, I put my foot in it here when he said, "Oh, that's a bit personal," but then he dismissed that and goes on to the full answer.
I remember, this is
pretty cool.
Slightly aside this, but if you read the first book, well, it's actually the second book, but the first proper autobiography book, he talks about when his daughter gets killed in a car accident, and it's one of the best written chapters I've ever read. I mean, it is crushingly sad, but he like much of certainly the mid period of Rush, that lyrically he stopped. I mean, I share some of the negativity about early Rush, because it was a wee bit ridiculous, you know, By Tor and the Snow Dog, you know, all that sort of stuff. It's a bit ridiculous. I love it, but I get why people say it as ridiculous. It's a bit like early Marillion, the same thing, you know, a wee bit daft, but then they matured quite quickly. And the lyrics from Moving Pictures onwards are fabulous, and you can tell it's him. When you hear that interview, Tom and Andy, you can tell that it's that intelligent man writing those lyrics. And yet to this day, I still read, there was something in the media last week about Rush saying, the Ayn Rand supporting Rush. He was 18 when he read that, and he stopped it after he was 19. But people still go back and talk about how he was an Ayn Rand fan and, you know, a far right, you know, and he wasn't. He matured as an individual. And again, it's so nice getting that little time capsule where he was clearly, he'd moved away from the political. He does come back to a little bit in later Rush albums, but he'd moved away from the political, and he was just talking about everyday life and relationships. And he does that communication through his music, not in interviews, which I think is great. I have no issue with that at all. I think it's lovely that he does that.
In subsequent and forthcoming podcasts, I'm hoping to find. I only interviewed Neil Peart once. It was just that once in '83, but I think I interviewed Geddy twice in probably the '90s and then again in the noughties. I interviewed Alex Lifeson 3 times in the '80s, '90s, and noughties. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to find the tapes somewhere in my attic of those interviews as well for subsequent podcasts.
well, let's just scrap the AAA. Let's just call it the Rush tapes, and let's just focus on that for the next 2 years.
When you were saying about Neil's child earlier, it made me think, I'm pretty sure I've got a couple of the Robert Plant interviews, and one of them, again, very early on, and he talks a lot about final performance at Nebworth and how he felt about John Bonham and why Led Zeppelin would never get back together as a band. But he also talks quite emotionally about the death of his child. So that's one that hopefully we'll be able to put up in weeks to come. The comparison of small venues, large venues, and why a band gets to a stage in their career, why they just have to play large venues, and I've tended to be critical in my younger day of bands that how come they're not playing the Glasgow Apollo, for example, or the Barrowland? Why do they have to go to these big venues? And Neil very, very clearly explains it, and it makes sense.
I like the way he does, because he's in the he answers he gives you a really long, detailed answer, and then he says, I'd like to take the opportunity when we are discussing venues a little bit earlier, and then he gives another massive answer. He thinks about it. It's like he gives really good detailed answers, and I just like that. I mean, I don't really know Rush. Hands up, I don't know Rush much, and sorry, sorry, mate, but they're fine.
Philistine was the cry.
There's always time for a change, Tom. As Neil says, you don't want to stay the same. So, I did listen to it, but I love the way he does that huge answer.
And what was the key bit that stuck with you, Tom, from that? What was the bit that you thought, that makes sense?
He didn't go into actual figures, but when he said, for example, the Glasgow Apollo at 3,500, we got to a stage in our career where we were spending 6 months touring the west coast of the USA, another 6 months the east coast of the USA, and really we only had time to do, was it 3 weeks,
3 weeks.
In Europe and the UK, and he says, yes, we could be playing these smaller venues, but it would mean that the whole tour was maybe 2.5 years. We want to get back to our family and see our children grow up. We want to relax. We can't have hotel, bus, plane, gig. The gig was the highlight of the day, obviously, but he was explaining how exhausting that the whole thing could be, and that just impossible to. And even going to the bigger venues, there's lots of the newer fans weren't able to get tickets.
I remember watching an interview with Geddy Lee backstage, and they'd just done the Farewell to the Kings tour, which is the album before Moving Pictures. They'd done 200 gigs in 1 year, and he looked dead. I mean, he was exhausted. And I mean, Geddy's not as careful with his words as Neil, and Geddy was utterly exhausted. You could see it. This was a band that made their reputation through playing live. They didn't get famous because they got a record deal. They played live and then they got a record deal. That's how they're a hard-working live band. And I think by the time they got to their 30s, they were done. I mean, they were absolutely exhausted. I mean, that's what the Beatles did after all, didn't they? The Beatles stopped because they couldn't cope with the live playing anymore. And I wouldn't have been surprised at all as a Rush fan if they'd stopped touring, because you could see it you hear it in the lyrics, songs like Limelight, Camera Eye. There's various songs that are all about how exhausted and how difficult it was to do this. And it made me think, guys, about some of these bands that have been going around now for 40, even 50 years now, who still do these massive tours. I mean, it must be completely exhausting. It'd be interesting to reflect on some of the newer bands, Tom, when we get there, and how they're feeling about touring, and then we could interview them again in 30 years and see how they feel about it, guys?
Mm-hmm. We've got a couple of Metallica interviews that we'll be putting up over the next few months, and one of them was round about the Load album, and there had been quite a gap, album releases between the Black Album and the Load album. I think it was maybe 4 years, 3-4 years, something like that. And again, as you can imagine, that was one of the things I honed into in the interview. Why it had taken so long, and again, it was Lars Ulrich, the drummer, and it explains it so well. You know, well, we toured for a year and a half. We had a couple of months off. Then they put us out on a tour for another year. No time to write songs, no time to do anything. So by the time we had a rest, wrote the songs, recorded the album, there you are, 3-4 years. Yeah. And they explained it very well, these guys.
I like the part at the end of the interview. He's talking about, you ask him, what's next? And he just goes, well, we're going to have a holiday. And then he says, and then after that, we're going to go into the studio, or we're going to hire a place. Then we're going to be there for a month. Then we're going to record. And then you'll have an album. I was like, wow. It's not like it was like 6 months after the tour had finished, because that Glasgow date, that Ingliston date is the last date of the tour.
Yeah.
So it's like 6 months and they're back making a record. There's a new record out to do it again.
Another thing that I found quite fascinating was, and as a Rush fanatic, Scott, you'll probably agree with me that when he talks about sound checks being a very, very important part of their day, that they didn't just use it to go 1 2 1 2 1 2 and the microphone and check the guitar sound. They actually come up with a lot of the ideas for songs at sound checks. And in the early days, they didn't record them, so all these ideas just disappeared.
Wasted.
And he talks about, and then we started recording these, and there was hours and hours of recorded stuff, but we got some little snippets from them. Well, I certainly enjoyed doing the interview, and hopefully some of you guys out there that have been that are listening to this have enjoyed it as well. As I mentioned earlier, we've got some more Rush interviews coming up in weeks and months to come with Alex and with Geddy. But our next podcast, which we'll be bringing to you in a couple of weeks, is with Eddie Van Halen and his big brother, Alex Van Halen. In fact, I've just realised that I've made a cod of it, because I was going to do what's called a tease, and I was going to say our next interview is going to be with two brothers who were born in Amsterdam, but when they were about 6, 7, 8 years of age, their family moved them to California, and I wasn't going to say who it was, but I've given the game away now. So next time it's going to be Alex and Eddie Van Halen on Tom's AAA tapes. Well, hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast. We've got lots more already recorded and lots more still to do. I've been rummaging in my loft, in my attic, on a regular basis. So if you'd like to subscribe, it costs you nothing. Just press the button that says subscribe, and we'll tell you when the next one's coming up. Thanks for watching and listening.